Welcome to the Beginner's Guide to League of Legends. This game can be incredibly overwhelming when getting started, and it takes a ton of time to really figure things out. Here at Skillcapped, we specialize in radically decreasing the time it takes to master League of Legends, so it only makes sense that we also make a guide for the noobs of noobs that are just getting into or thinking about starting League. This is the best place to get started, and after watching, you should have an excellent understanding of the following topics, which we'll tackle in this order throughout the guide. How the lanes and jungle works on Summoner's Rift, what trading and vision is, how to best acquire gold, how to itemize, how to avoid clickbait, what champions to play, how to learn your champion, how to win a game, and common League of Legends terminologies and must-use settings. And just before we get into it, we want to make sure you all know that this guide comes from Skillcapped, which is the best place to improve at League of Legends. We break down complicated concepts and teach them in a way that makes sense with over 10 guides released every week, alongside a direct pro coaching service and a 5-division rank up guarantee. If you don't significantly improve when actively using Skillcapped, then you don't pay for it. Simple as that. With that being said, let's jump into the guide. The very first thing you want to do is simply go through the tutorial. This is a fairly complex game, and the tutorial just gets you acquainted with all the basic mechanics of the game, such as how your abilities work, how to buy items, and how to take towers. Assuming you've already done that, let's talk about what lanes are. There are 3 lanes in Summoner's Rift, all leading from your own base to the enemy nexus. In all lanes, there are towers to defend the push from the minions that spawn on both sides. Your goal as a laner is simply to beat your opponent, take their towers, and make it easier to access their base to eventually destroy their nexus to win the game. So, which lane do you go to? It's actually quite simple. There's already an established meta for which lane you will go to based on the champion you're playing. For you lone wolves who love playing assassins and mages, you will be heading towards the mid lane. Mid is often considered the most important role in the game because of its accessibility to everywhere on the map, which is why these 2 types of champions thrive here. Mages almost always go mid. They're ability-based champions with powerful spells to control large areas in fights. On the other hand, assassins love to be in the mid lane because they're always looking for a fresh target to kill. Being in the middle of the map gives them the most options possible when it comes to finding new prey. Top lane is for all the chads out there and known as the 1v1 island. Top is naturally the farthest away from all the action in the early game, so very often the lane is left alone from outside intervention. This is where fighter-type champions thrive, who want to duel each other constantly. If you're looking to establish dominance over your opponent, then this is definitely the lane you'll want to play. That being said, tanks are also played in the top lane. They're the only class who can stand up to fighters in a 1v1 situation. So if you want to be a beefy frontline for your team later on, then you can also play tanks up here. Now for the bot lane. This is the only lane where you will be with a partner. The usual picks for bot are gonna be marksman and support type champions. Marksmen are required for most team compositions due to their high damage output in the later stages of the game. Unfortunately, they're quite frail during the early game, so a meta evolved where they are paired up with a support type champion whose goal is to keep them safe while they become powerful. Marksmen are without a doubt the most important role in team fights throughout the game, so everyone will be gunning to get you. Combined with the fact that you're a bit reliant on your support during the early game to do well, it makes marksman a high pressure role where you can make or break a game based on your decisions. But that's definitely what can make it so exciting when you do go off and carry your team to victory. As for supports, there's 2 types you can play. There are enchanter based supports who are basically there to ensure the safety of their marksman, as we just discussed. It's definitely one of the more chill roles in the game, since supports are not expected to last hit minions. All the gold from minions in the lane is expected to go towards marksman. Your job is simply to make sure that the enemy bot lane duo can't deny your marksman from any farm, and look to deny your farm from them as well by playing aggressively. Later on in the game, enchanters are quite strong due to their healing and shielding capabilities, allowing them to keep their allies from dying in team fights. You can also play engage supports who are on the tankier side. Engage supports are the complete opposites of enchanters. You're looking to play aggressively from the get-go, aiming to score kills with a massive amount of crowd control built into your kit. Keep in mind that not having to last hit minions doesn't mean you have to play passively and do nothing either. Supports can play incredibly aggressively on the map, roaming around to score kills because they're not tied down to a lane in order to farm. Of course, that does take a bit of skill to do. It requires knowing when your marksman is safe enough to leave them alone for a bit, so it's not something you can just pick up and do. But we don't want you to fall into the trap of thinking that supports don't do anything. They are one of the most influential roles in the game during the early stages, along with junglers. Keep in mind that these are just the most common archetypes played in each role. You can play whatever you want in any role at any time, such as mage supports, marksman top, tanks mid, and so on. Having just mentioned jungle, that is the last role we must discuss to get you started. It is by far the most unique role since you won't really be tied down to one lane, but rather you'll be killing jungle monsters to get gold and experience. As a jungler, you get the most freedom to move around the map out of any role, due to the fact that you can kill jungle camps in basically any order you want. Of course, there are basic routes that you'll have to learn to optimize your income, but otherwise you have the freedom to go towards any lane in order to influence what's going on. For example, if you see that an enemy champion is low in top, you may want to consider heading up there to help your ally score kills. Likewise, if your own teammates are low, then you may consider pathing over there to lend them a helping hand and turn things around. You're also responsible for many of the buffs on the map because you will be required to run the Smite Summoner spell. Smite does a huge burst of damage to any neutral camp on the map, which means it will be your job in securing the last hit on objectives when your team is taking them. We'll touch more on objectives in a bit, but the two buffs that junglers should definitely know about are the blue and red buffs. Blue buff is acquired by landing the killing blow on the blue sentinel in both your jungle and the enemies. While you have it, you get a ton of mana regeneration, while also having lower cooldowns on all your abilities. Red buff is obtained by killing the red brambleback found on both sides of the jungle as well. It will give your auto attacks extra burn damage, as well as slowing your opponent down. It's the perfect buff for auto attack based champions. These are both very powerful buffs, so you may even want to consider invading the enemy jungle and contesting them. We don't recommend doing that for beginners, but as you improve, you'll learn how the enemy jungler is likely pathing and can punish them by taking their camps and buffs right from under their noses. Lastly, the jungle role is the most diverse in terms of what type of champion you play. Mages, assassins, tanks, whatever you wish to play. The only limiting factor in what you can play in the jungle is how well that specific champion can clear the jungle camps. Back to laning, the next thing you'll want to know is how to trade with your opponent. Trading just means fighting with each other and trying to bring the other's health down more than they bring your own health down. As much as we'd love to sit here all day and talk about trading, we can't. There's so much nuance behind it based on what lane and matchup you're playing, but we can say a few things for certain. Obviously, your goal should be to come out ahead whenever you engage your opponent. Trading 30% of your own health for 60% of theirs is almost always going to be a good idea. One of the simplest ways to ensure that trades go your way is knowing about minion aggro. Basically, whenever you attack an enemy champion, the enemy minions will draw aggro onto you. This also works against your opponent. A simple concept to keep in mind is to avoid trades whenever your opponent has more minions than you do, since minion damage is very scary, especially during the early levels of the game. And vice versa. If you have a large wave, you should know that you're more freely able to trade with your opponent, because if they fight back, your minions will make their lives miserable. There's a few goals you can achieve by bringing your opponent's health down. The first thing everyone thinks about is scoring kills. That's the dream scenario and what most people care about when going for trades. But there's more consistent advantages you can get with trades. Remember that minions give experience if they die while you're around, and give gold if you last hit them as they're about to die. By having a health advantage, you can pressure your opponent away from the wave to ensure that they can't last hit your minions, denying them a ton of gold. League is a game about buying items with the gold that you earn. So gaining this type of advantage is very good in the long run, since you'll have more items than they do at some point. A bigger price than denying last hits though is denying the minion experience altogether. If you're winning trades hard enough, you can start forcing your opponent really far away from the wave, denying them from even getting levels. This is very hard to do considering that the range at which you get experience from minions is massive, but it's definitely one of the bigger advantages you can gain by learning how to trade well. Lastly, the biggest prize you can get out of good trades is taking the enemy tower. If you play the tutorial, you'll remember that turrets have 5 plates that give you gold when you manage to take them down. Forcing your opponent to recall for health through trades will allow you to get huge gold advantages by getting these turret plates, which can ultimately lead you to taking the whole turret, giving you a massive influx of gold. Beyond trading, you also have to worry about the enemy jungler coming into your lane and killing you, also known as ganking you. This is one of the things LoL players hate the most. It's very frustrating suddenly being outnumbered and killed. Ganks of course can work because Summoner's Rift is covered in Fog of War, so you can't see the gank coming. If Fog of War didn't exist, you'd easily be able to pull back to the safety of your tower. Fortunately, you do have access to stealth wards. Their function is to illuminate the surrounding area of the ward. Use these wisely as they do not last forever and have a long cooldown. you'll want to place them in ganking hotspots, which you'll learn with experience, or simply by watching our warding guides. You can also buy additional vision tools at the shop, like swapping your stealth wards for a sweeping lens which reveals stealth wards, or purchasing control wards for your inventory. Control wards do last forever but aren't invisible unlike your stealth wards, so they can easily be discovered and killed by the enemy. They also detect and disable stealth wards, allowing you to kill enemy stealth wards and deny vision. This is all part of a much bigger picture that lasts throughout the game, which is the vision game in League of Legends that all players participate in. The more information your team gathers, the better decisions you can make. The more information you deny from the enemy team, the worse decisions they will make. Support players have the biggest role in the vision game because they have the most wards, and you'll constantly hear battles for vision being talked about whenever you watch competitive League of Legends. Again, if you want to learn everything there is to know here, like the best warding spots and trick placements, then check out our guides. At its core, League of Legends is a game about buying items in order to strengthen your champion over time. The more items you have over your opponent, the easier of a time you'll have killing them and eventually their nexus. You can obtain gold to buy items in multiple ways, by last hitting minions, killing jungle monsters, destroying enemy towers, or taking down the enemy champions. What we want to mention is that while all of these sources of gold are good, the most consistent one you want to focus on is farming minions or jungle monsters for gold. Newer players often fall for the bait of trying to go for kills all the time for the sweet 300 gold you get from everyone, but kills are few and far between. A good guideline to keep in mind as you get into the game is that 15 minions on average give you as much gold as a kill. The biggest tip veterans give to newer players by far is to focus on farming and going for kills when they're free and not focusing on them too much. As we said, the whole point of earning gold in the first place is to buy items, and that can definitely be one of the more confusing things to learn as a newer player. Figuring out what to build in every game can be quite stressful, especially since there's over 150 champions now who all have unique builds. Let's go over some of the basic knowledge you'll need to know to get started. Basically, there's two types of damage in the game, ability-based damage and attack damage. In the shop, if an item offers attack damage, it will increase the damage of your auto attacks. If an item offers ability power, then it will usually increase the damage of your abilities. This isn't always the case, but there's an easy way of distinguishing what type of items you want to buy. Look at your abilities tooltip. If your abilities scale off attack damage, they will have a brown text indicating their attack damage scaling. If they have blue text, then they scale off ability power. As for defensive items, it's rather simple. If you're against champions dealing attack damage, then you can buy armor to mitigate their power. And if you're dying to champions who deal primarily ability damage, then you can buy items with magic resist to help survive against them. A neat feature for figuring out what kind of damage you're dying to is that while you're dead, the death recap function will break down how much damage you took from each damage type. More often than not, that will help you figure out which defensive stat you need the most. It can be a bit overwhelming to know what to buy when learning to play though, which is why Riot has a fairly good recommended item tab in the shop. It'll show you exactly what to build and even give you recommendations based on what you're up against, and serves as a great starting point for newer players while they learn what all the items do. People have also created websites to help you through this process as well, such as u.gg and blitz.gg. They give you all the information you're looking for, such as proper rune setups, skill order, and itemization guides based on stats, so you don't have to fry your brain trying to figure out what everything does, and just focus on learning how to play the game instead. On this topic, we want to quickly make sure you're aware of the insane amount of clickbait that goes around in the league scene. When getting started, you'll be drawn to the most popular influencers who create content with stuff like top 10 most OP Korean builds or 1000 AP one-shot build, and so on. Nightblue, for example, is incredibly entertaining and you should definitely check him out. Just be aware that his crazy builds when smurfing, as with many other channels, will often look fun and sound convincing, but are just for entertainment and will more often than not will bait you into thinking they're good if you're inexperienced, leaving you with rough games because the builds are usually just bad. With so many champions in the game, you may have a hard time deciding what to play. Don't worry, we'll cover 2 champions for each role that are super easy for beginners to pick up and start having success with. For mid lane, the most recommended champion in the game for beginners is definitely Annie. Her Q makes last hitting a breeze, allowing you to learn the basics of laning. She's also an incredibly simple champion to play with a very straightforward kit. There's no fancy moves involved with her. She just drops shivers down on her opponents and one-shots them. As for an assassin, we'd recommend Ahri. She's very easy to pick up, but has one of the highest skill expressions in the game if you do end up choosing to master her over time. For top lane, our recommended pick would be Cho'Gath. His passive gives him absurd sustain during the laning phase, making him a noob-friendly champion since he's so hard to punish. He's a beefy tank who also deals a ton of damage, and a great pick no matter the situation. If you're more of a fighter though, look no further than Darius. Darius makes killing opponents a breeze since he outdamages almost every other top laner in the game. The only hard part about him is landing his axe swing sweet spot for a self-heal, but otherwise you just auto-attack people and execute them with your ultimate. For jungle, the recommended pick will definitely be Warwick. Jungle is by far the hardest role to pick up as a newer player because of having to kite camps and knowing efficient pathing. Warwick makes killing the camp simple since he has so much built-in sustain, so you don't have to worry about it. Being a good jungler requires you to look at the map and lanes all the time, which can be difficult when you're trying to learn everything. Thankfully, Warwick literally tells you when there's low health enemies on the map, allowing you to focus on the jungle and learn the basics first. The other jungler we'd recommend would be Master Yi. If you'd like to become an unstoppable machine, then he's your guy. Master Yi is about power farming creeps and minions until he gets enough items to just run over anyone and anything. He takes no skill to pick up and is incredibly rewarding, especially in lower levels of play. For ADC, the two champions we'd recommend would be Ashe and Jinx. Both of them function very similarly as auto-attack based marksmen and are extremely simple to play. There's just a slight difference between them. Ashe is built around slowing the enemy down with her frost arrows and setting up engages with her ultimate arrow, whereas Jinx is more about doing raw DPS and being the hyper carry in team fights. Both are quite distinct from each other, but play basically the same way and are easy to pick up. Lastly, for supports, if you're into traditional type of supports from most games who are about healing and shielding their teammates, then we'd highly recommend Janna as your starter support. Her kit is literally built for peeling her enemies off her teammates and is incredibly easy to pull off. Not only that, but she's very rewarding for how easy she is to play, making her an excellent pick to start winning games instantly. League is also a bit unique where you can run playmaking supports as well, who are meant to be played very aggressively and can even be one of the most influential roles on the team. If you want to be all over the map setting up kills left and right for your team, then we'd highly recommend Leona. Leona is an unkillable tank whose entire kit is basically locking people down while also dealing meaningful damage at the same time. She is by far the easiest engaged support to pick up and is incredibly potent at power levels of play due to how hard she is to play around. Alright, once you've decided what champion you want to play, you will of course have 4 abilities to work with and your passive. All champions' abilities will synergize with each other in some way, and it'll be a good idea to use them in a particular order depending on the situation. Let's take Annie as our example here. Her passive gives her a stun on the 4th spell she casts. Her Q deals single target damage and refunds mana when used to last hit a minion. Her W deals area of effect damage. Her E grants her or a teammate a shield and a speed increase. And her ultimate is a big bear that also deals area of effect damage. Jumping into training tool, let's think about how our spells work. You'll want to cast spells in order to stack up your passive. Since Q gives mana back when you last hit a minion with it, it would make sense that you'd stack your passive up by killing minions with it. Then you can cast a spell to land a stun. With her ultimate being the highest range ability she has and her E giving movement speed, she should E herself to move more quickly and then cast ultimate to stun and deal damage to the enemy. With her 2 spells left being the point and click Q and the AoE damage W, she'll want to cast W while the enemy is stunned so they can't dodge it, then the point and click Q after to land maximum damage. This is an example of a basic combo. Of course, this is all gonna sound terribly confusing for you, but once you pick up your champion, you should enter training tool and read your abilities and think about how they work. You can also search for champion guides as well, but we recommend to always read your abilities and figure things out by yourself in training tool as the first step when learning a champion. Okay, we've now covered a lot about how to become strong in the game, but how exactly do you win? Well, of course you need to kill the enemy nexus, but the towers, inhibitors, and the enemy team are in your way before you can do that. To help you destroy these structures and make your way to the enemy nexus, there are neutral objectives on the map which are Rift Herald, Baron, Elemental Dragons, and Elder Dragon. These exist both as an incentive for both teams to fight during the early and late game and also to help a team end the game faster with the buffs they offer. Without these neutrals, each game of League of Legends could last much longer than they currently do, which is around 30 minutes long. On the top side of the map, you have the Rift Herald. It can spawn twice during the early game, with the first spawn being at 8 minutes. It will then despawn at just under 20 minutes. Upon killing it, you or a teammate can pick up the Eye of the Herald, which replaces the warding slot. To use it, go to a lane and summon it. It will then charge up and crash into the enemy tower, dealing significant damage and accelerating the pace of the game. After 20 minutes, Baron Nashor will spawn. Baron is very difficult to kill and shreds your resistances while you're fighting it, making it risky to try to kill as the enemy team could come to stop you if they're alive and in the area. Typically, teams kill Baron Nashor after 25 minutes into the game when they've wiped the enemy team. Respawn timers become much longer at that point, giving them time to kill it while the enemy team revives. Once you kill Baron, you'll gain empowered recalls, allowing you to recall quickly, and your damage stats will be increased for 3 minutes. But much more importantly, you'll gain a buff for your nearby minion waves, allowing them to move faster, deal more damage, and become much tankier. This allows you and your teammates to siege towers with very tanky waves which soak tower damage, allowing you to kill towers and expose the enemy base and ultimately the Nexus. You will often see teams spread out between 2 or 3 lanes with the Baron buffs to buff as many minion waves as possible. Unlike Rift Herald, the Baron will respawn every 6 minutes after it's been killed until the game ends. On the bottom side of the map, we have the elemental dragons: Inferno, Cloud, Ocean, and Mountain. Each dragon gives you a small buff depending on what type of dragon it is. The first 2 dragons that spawn are unique. The third dragon that spawns will change the entirety of Summoner's Rift in a unique way. For example, if Infernal Dragon spawns, much of Summoner's Rift is left in fire and ruin, demolishing a lot of the walls in the jungle. The dragon type that is the third to spawn will be the only dragon type that spawns for the rest of the game. If Infernal is third, Inferno will be the only dragon to spawn until a team kills 4 dragons in total. The first team that kills 4 dragons will gain a Dragon Soul, a significant buff that lasts the entirety of the game. Dragon Souls have 4 different types of buffs depending on each dragon. Of course, whichever dragon spawns third decides the buff that's up for grabs in that game. After a team has acquired Dragon Soul, an Elder Dragon will spawn 5 minutes after. This dragon equals the might of Baron Nashor, but is strong for a different reason. Where Baron is used to buff minions and siege towers, Elder Dragon is made for fighting, giving you a buff that burns your enemies over time as you hit them, and most importantly, instantly executes your opponent once they hit 20% health. Let's quickly go over some settings that will definitely make your life easier as you get started. The first thing you want to do is go into your hotkeys and put everything on Quick Cast All. What this does is it removes the need to click twice to cast your abilities and makes them go off in one press instead. It can be tricky to get used to this, but it's important to do this as soon as possible or you're gonna build a bad habit of playing slower than everyone else because you normal cast your spells. That being said, you do want to go down a bit in the hotkeys section into abilities and summoner spells and assign a keybind to normal cast all your abilities. Most people use a shift modifier for these keybinds, but whatever works for you is fine. With this, you can always bring up the range indicator on your abilities whenever you're unsure whether they're gonna hit or not. This way, you get the speed of quick casting but can have the information of normal casting whenever you need it. Make sure to do these keybinds with item slots as well for the same reasons. With that done, go into the interface section. Scroll down a bit and you're gonna want to select champion name for names above health bars. There's a ton of skins in League of Legends now, and you're definitely gonna fall down the rabbit hole of buying them yourself as well. This setting is perfect for newer players who aren't accustomed to all the skins in the game, so you can see exactly what champion you're up against at all times regardless of their appearance. Keep scrolling down in interface and you're gonna want to enable show neutral camps if it isn't already checked. Basically, this shows all the jungle monsters that are up on the map, but more importantly, the dragon and baron objectives which you'll definitely want to be fighting over. After that, scroll down to the chat section. All chat and allied chat are definitely personal preference. As a newer player, you may encounter a lot of toxicity, and if you don't want to deal with any of that, you can just turn both of these off. The more important setting here though is show timestamps. When enabled, whenever something is said in the chat, it'll show you exactly when it was said. This is a very useful tool for timing things in general, specifically the enemy summoner spells. In League of Legends, you get extra abilities known as summoner spells. These are very straightforward, but what you should know is that 99% of champions run flash every single game. It's a short blink which is usually used to escape ganks, and this is very important to keep track of. When you see your opponent use flash, press the tab key to bring up the scoreboard and then left click the enemy's flash icon. This will ping it in the chat so you can see exactly when they used it. Then just do some quick math and add 5 minutes from when it was pinged in the chat to know exactly when your opponent's flash is up, so you can potentially coordinate ganks on them while they're vulnerable. Let's wrap this up with some quick-fire terminology explanations you'll find useful now that you're entering the league scene. Gank and ganking is when a player, usually the jungler, enters the lane to set up a kill with a numbers advantage. Backdoor is when a team sneaks one or more players into the enemy base to try to end the game before the enemy can stop it. Counter gank is when the enemy jungler is ready and ganks the same lane that's being ganked to counter it. Counter jungle is when a jungler invades the enemy jungle to steal the enemy jungle camps. Invading is when you and your team enter enemy territory together. This often happens at the start of the game where you try to catch people who are AFK for a free kill. Pushing is when a player pushes the wave into enemy tower, giving them priority, chances to harass the enemy as a last hit, and good recall timings. Roaming is when a player leaves a lane to go to another lane or nearby fight, often to play the jungler's role and look for ganks. Lane priority is generally when a player has their minion wave pushed into the enemy tower, allowing them to leave lane quickly to assist with nearby fights. While they move, their opponent is stuck under their tower, clearing the wave. Creep score, or CS, is the amount of last hits a player has collected throughout the game. Freezing is when a player controls the wave to keep the minions in a certain spot for a long period of time, making ganks easier and more. Reset, back timings, and recalling are essentially the same thing. It's just recalling to the shop to buy items once you have enough gold. Inting and inters are abbreviations to essentially say someone is intentionally feeding. They're now used to describe players who are doing poorly, whether it's intentional or not. Diving is when players extend themselves into dangerous positions to land kills. This could be diving a backline in a teamfight or tower diving someone and trying to kill them before they and the tower can kill you. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.